How did you get started in economic development?
When you look up full circle in the dictionary, it's going to be me. My very first true paycheck job was working at the Tourism Chamber and Industrial Development Office.
What excites you the most about the future of small town America?
I see a bright future for small town America. People want to come home because they want their kids to have that same experience, go to the same schools they went to, play on the same football fields. You can do big business that you normally would do on Wall Street that you can now do on Main Street, USA.
And you actually wrote a book
I did.
called Small Town Sexy.
It's that seductive allure that small towns have for so many people that just brings you in and grabs your heartstrings and makes you never want to leave. I've always said Bardstown's my third child.
Yeah.
And, I think it takes someone that has a passion like that about your community to really want to push it forward. And there's a lot of people out there that are like that.
Today, I'm excited to sit down with Kim Huston, one of the most influential voices in small town economic development. As the former president and CEO of the Nelson County Economic Development Agency, Kim helped secure nearly $2 billion in investments and played a pivotal role in making Bardstown, Kentucky, the bourbon capital of the world. She is the author of the book on small town success, Small Town Sexy, and pioneered an integrated economic development model that communities across the country now try to replicate. Kim has also been a driving force in international investment, bringing 10 Japanese companies to Bardstown. And today, she continues shaping Kentucky's economic landscape as the chair of the Kentucky Tourism Finance Development Authority. Kim's known for saying you can do Wall Street business on Main Street, USA, and her career is proof of exactly that. Today, we're diving into her playbook, how to build a thriving community, attract investment, and why she believes the future of small town America is brighter than ever. Please welcome Kim Huston.
All right, Kim Huston, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to do this first little interview with you. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you for asking me. I'm honored to be one of the first, I guess.
You're the first.
I am
So
the first. Okay. Thank you. Then I'm even
first,
more honored now.
well deserving. So listen, we could start in a million places about your career. You've seen so many awesome projects and been a part of so many, but how about this? You tell us, how did you get started in economic development? Because everyone I've ever spoken to that's in this business has a completely different path of how they started. So how did you start?
Well, there is no real path, to be honest. But when you look up full circle in the dictionary, it's going to be me because I have literally come full circle in my career. My very first true paycheck job was working at the Tourism Chamber and Industrial Development Office when I was in college. You had to write a letter to the mayor and say why he should pick you to be one of the city ambassadors and work at this little visitor center.
Oh,
And
wow.
elected for 2 summers. It was when I was in college and I came home for the 2 summers. And I worked alongside the chamber director, the tourism director, and the industrial development director. And so that was kind of putting my toe into the pond of economic development, I guess, as you were. And I loved it so much that the lady who was a chamber director who actually hired me, I had been there 20 some odd years. And I told her when she retired, I wanted her to call me because I wanted to take her job. And well, when she came to retire after 25 years, she called me. And I was
Wow.
actually another profession in Bardstown at the time. I was in radio broadcasting. And she said, I'm retiring and I'd love for you to take the job. So I went through the interview process and was hired as the chamber director in 1989
Wow.
and been in community development of some sort ever since. So that was really my first, and she continued to be such a mentor to me for many, many years after that.
Yeah, how great is that? So from the onset, your introduction into economic development, which I think is going to get into what we're going to talk about as it relates to small town America, but your introduction was chamber, economic development, tourism, which I think is a great example of why certain small towns are just so special because it's all one group versus separate
Yeah.
groups. I'm sure is relevant in some cases where they should be separate. But I think it's interesting. Your first introduction into economic development, it was one cohesive thing. So Talk a little bit about that and why in some cases that makes small town America so special.
Several years ago, we had a really smart mayor and a really smart county judge who realized that all the agencies that they help fund, Chamber, Main Street, Tourism, and Industrial Development, never really talked to each other. We were all separated in different buildings. We all had different directors. Our board of directors were all different too. And we were sort of competitive in some aspects of economic development, whether it be tourism or small businesses or manufacturing operations. But these gentlemen came together and said, we need to be better. If we are putting the money in these agencies, we need them all to work together. And at that point in time, it was 1993 or something like that. They actually formed the Nelson County Economic Development Agency. And that
Okay.
agency is the umbrella agency over the Chamber, the Tourism, Main Street Operation, and Industrial Development. So what we all did, we actually located in a building downtown in the old courthouse, all on one floor, and acted like one giant economic development department with the tourism area and the chamber area. We all had our own directors. We all had our own budget. We all had our own sources of income, but we came together and we worked together. And I think that's one thing that really set Bardstown and Nelson County apart because it's much easier to work as a team of 10 people or 11 people than each agency having two people here or four people here or three people here. We really did work in unity. And it was so much so that we had a lot of communities across the state, probably 2 dozen, that ended up coming in and visiting us and exploring how we formed this type of organization for everyone to work together. So, we mentored several communities across the state into working on their formation of an economic development agency.
Interesting. So tell me that community started reaching out to Bardstown.
Yeah,
At what point, how long had you all been doing everything cohesively? Because as you know, we work all across the state and work with so many different communities. And, I'm aware that it's not one size fits all. Not every community, I'm sure, should be cohesive with these three organizations because in some cases, tourism is just so big that they need to do their own thing. But I don't know. I find myself more in the camp in most cases those 3 organizations, because almost every single community has a chamber,
you're right. Mhm.
tourism office, and economic development. In most cases, I do believe it's more likely that they should be working together. So anyways, when did that start? When did the community start reaching out? When they reach out, what is that conversation like for them to learn from your all's success?
Well, I think they start seeing some of our successes. When tourism would go to their, conferences or chamber would go to theirs, they would share so many of the successes they would have and talk about this unification of economic development. And it struck a nerve. And then I was actually very honored to be asked to speak at several times at the Kentucky League of Cities or the Kentucky Association of Counties to speak to these leaders, the mayors, the county judges, the magistrates, the city council people, and talk about how to best do economic development. Because Bardstown at the time was not only striving in tourism, but our main street was growing. Our chamber was one of the largest in the state. And we started really hitting industrial development hard. As you know, with your experience at the Cabinet for Economic Development, we were selling land and recruiting companies left and right. So I think they saw these success stories. And when we talked to these communities, we never said do it like we do it because every town is a snowflake. No one is different. But as long as these agencies communicate, collaborate together. They don't have to be in the same building. They don't have to be under one umbrella, but they do need to eliminate the silos and all work together. So each of them know it's good. I cannot tell you the times that I've had an industrial client come into my office and then afterwards I hand them right over to tourism for them to take them on a tour of the tourism attractions here.
Yeah.
So, where the Main Street director will take them downtown to see all of our boutiques and restaurants and shops and things like that. It's a one-stop center really for business in Bardstown, Nelson County, and businesses do like that.
So that's a perfect segue, Kim, into working projects, right? Whether they're
Mhm.
industrial related or not, but you have a client into your office, and what a great way to help them further make their decision of where they should locate. Because in a lot of cases, the driving decision is site selection, the particular site, does it work for their operation? Do you have the workforce? But let's not kid ourselves. Economic development is quality of life, right? Quality of
It
life
is.
is economic development. And being able to hand them off to, whether it was the tourism director or the chamber director to take them downtown, those go into the decision making process, right?
It is impressive. I can't tell you the number of times I've had companies saying that I like the fact that you had so many people so educated about your town that could actually be educated to tell us this or that or this. What about your school systems? About the quality of life? What about your infrastructure? How many small businesses do you have? Your doctors? How are your hospitals? And I
Yeah,
think with the team of economic development people in tourism chamber, Main Street, and industrial development, we could answer all those questions. And it was one of those things that set us apart a little bit. And I think some of the clients that we had, some of the recruits we had, remember that. And I
sure.
think it set us maybe a little bit apart that we would maybe get that next visit anyway to help educate them. I always tell people, and I say this to this day too, give me the wife of the plant manager that's going to
Yeah.
be moving into your community. Let me have her for 2 hours and take her around the community. And if I sell her, I have sold her husband.
Oh, that
And
is
they
so
will
great.
actually move there and the company will move there. I've always thought that because, they want to move their families there. They want to move their wives there. And those families and wives have to be happy where they're going to be living and raising their families. And I do really good with the wives of some of these plant managers.
Kim, I need to add that to our list when we are advising communities on how to prepare themselves to win more projects. Have you spoken to the wife?
Yes,
I,
exactly.
I mean, it's funny, but it's so true. That's great. So let's talk projects, Kim. I mean, it's impossible for you to pick one. I mean, again, I mean this. You've worked so many great projects in Bardstown. I mean, I think I saw where nearly $2 billion of
Yeah.
investments and now some projects that you've worked. So I'm going to ask you to name a few. I know that would be hard, but what stands out over your 20 plus year career of running economic development in Bardstown and Nelson County? What projects stand out?
Well, I have to say my projects are like my children, that I
Yeah,
do not have a favorite,
sure.
but I have some memorable ones. And honestly, I have to say my international clients are some of my favorite. I absolutely love working with the Japanese companies. The Japanese culture is something I'm just fascinated with. They're so caring and they're so professional and they're just good negotiators and they're good business people. And I loved every time that I had some Japanese clients in. We ended up, by the time I retired, we had 10 Japanese companies that had
Wow.
located in Bardstown, and they were not all automotive. I mean, they
Sure.
were very, very diversified in types of products that they made. And we had one from Thailand as well, too, headquartered in Bangkok. And those are so interesting to learn the culture, to study their culture. One of probably the most exciting thing I ever did was to be able to take a trip to Japan and visit all 10 headquarters of my
Oh, wow.
Japanese clients. And those are the types of things that the companies are impressed that you care that much about them, that you want to come to them to talk to their leaders, to be over there to learn more and to show that we are here for you. I always tell people you will remain with me way after the ribbon cutting and the grand opening. We're here for you as throughout your entire business career in our community. And I think that's really important. But the Japanese, I love working with those companies. They just have a way about doing business that's very enticing.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't think we've ever spoken about this, but you mentioning working with Japanese companies reminded me of a story. I think I just
Yes,
heard through the grapevine.
I
I,
know
I
what you're going to say.
okay.
Binoculars.
Yes, there was a deal that you were working
Yeah.
in, in a lot of cases, I think what a lot of people don't understand, like these site selection projects, I mean, they're looking at many, many states, many sites within each state. They start to narrow it down. And there was one particular deal where they were towards the end, and maybe it was the owner or CEO of the company, did not tell anybody he was
Yep.
coming, drove the bar sound himself, and you just found him walking on the street. I mean, you could tell the story better than I,
Yeah.
but that make the decision. What tell that story.
That ended up being the Secretary of Economic Development ended up telling that story, at every speech he ever gave that
Okay.
year. It was really
Yeah.
funny. So I'll tell you who it was. It was Takigawa. It was still
Okay.
one of my favorite clients I ever had was Takigawa. And they had, shown them the land. They had gone to other communities and looked around. And the next day I was sitting in my office and I had this beautiful office that had a window that looked right down Main Street. I could see everything that was going on in town,
Sure.
honestly. And I kept a little my husband's little hunting binoculars I had stolen from him from that year because it was not hunting season. And I always looked out just to see what was going on. And I saw these Japanese gentlemen who had gotten out of a car that was really something I had remembered. It was very familiar to me. And so I got my binoculars out and I was looking. And it was Mr. Takigawa and his other gentleman who had been with him on this trip. And they had come back. They had come back to Bardstown. And I was like, oh, Mr. Takigawa is back in town. I guess that's good news. So on the phone, called the county judge very quickly, who is upstairs. I said, meet me downstairs right now. And he said, why? I said, trust me. So we go downstairs. We walk out the front door, and Mr. Takigawa, his entourage, is crossing the street. And I look up and yell, Mr. Takigawa, welcome back to Bardstown. The county judge is standing there, and we do our little bow. And he waves at me, and I said, come out, come see us. And he walked across the street, and we brought him back in and gave him some water and just said, we're so glad that you're back. It's nice to see you all again. If there's anything that we can do for you. And the county judge, shook his hand and I shook his hand and they ended up leaving. But they told that story
Right.
when they announced and when they did the grand opening, they said it was that personal attention that we
Yeah.
cared enough about them to not only remember them, to come out and greet them.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. That was one of the highlights, I think, of my career because, and Lucas, this so much, not only with, MWM right now, but your time at the Economic Development Cabinet, you're in competition with communities and states all over the country.
Yeah.
And the fact that a company from Japan would go through dozens of towns and ended up picking us was always such an honor. And I don't think there's anything more rewarding than to be selected from dozens of communities across the
I
US.
I think it's a story that should resonate with communities across the state, region, country, however you want to phrase it. Because again, within the site selection process, there are major decisions that have to be made. These companies are investing millions upon millions of dollars. You know what's funny? I tell my team here at MWM all the time, economic development is classic of treating $1 million like $10, right? Like you see a $10 million project nowadays, like, oh, that's a small project. I mean, I don't have $10 million to just throw around, right? Like,
Yeah,
that
right.
is big, serious money we're
I get
talking
it.
about. So there, it's easy to forget in our business, like how much money is being spent on these facilities and why these decisions are so important to the point of them coming down to Main Street, especially international companies, and getting out of their car and feeling welcomed within that community. I saw one of the major site selection consultants in the country posted something on LinkedIn not that long ago that every single deal, it comes down to land, it comes down to utilities, it comes down to workforce. But once you get to the end, once you get to the final
Yeah.
two, four, there is that feel good component. And
Yeah.
I know it sounds cliche and every community can try to hang their hat on this. And in some cases, that's good or bad, but there's a still good component that goes into the decision making process that could catapult you from fifth to first. Right. And I think people remembering that, what you just said, because I think some people might have assumed in your shoes, like, oh, they're wanting to walk around, not be bothered. Right. But that welcoming
They
feel.
probably did, but
Well,
you're
no,
not gonna get
well,
that when you come to Bardstown. I'm going
no,
to
but I mean,
ambush you.
I think that was like it's such a story that resonated with me when I heard it when I was at the cabinet of like even pieces like that go into making a decision, especially when these companies are investing millions of dollars and they're moving from another country.
It's a big deal, and every community has a lot of things to give to them, and they had told me before, not just my Japanese companies, but some of these large companies that we have recruited over the years, that doing business as a small town is very enticing. You feel very welcomed. They like being a big fish in a small town. The permitting and regulation process is pretty seamless. and
Sure.
they can get things done quicker here. And so many of these clients that I've had over the years, they were on a tight time frame. I need to do this. I need to get the land here and I need to start construction now and I need to be open in a certain time because they have a client that they're producing for. So they're on
Right.
a time frame. And when they look at a smaller community or they look at big city where the permitting is a little more difficult and not as time sensitive, then small towns do look appealing to them. And I,
Sure.
I know a couple times that has been the case for Bardstown as well, too. That would have been something that was of interest and they had to get going, they had to get going fast. And we
Right.
were shovel ready, permitting, zoning was done, everything was done. All they had to do is dig the dirt.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of digging dirt and zoning, let's talk bourbon. I mean,
Let's do. I'll drink
that's
to that.
yeah, yeah, you and me both. I mean, such a, major
And
part and piece of your story and Bardstown's story. I mean, there's so many that we could talk about, but I mean, walk us through all the awesome bourbon opportunities that you've had while being in Bardstown and Nelson County. I mean, again, I just that's another very specific Bardstown related story that you played such a big role in.
it was so much fun. I
Yeah,
mean, I was in it during the whole bourbon boom time.
right.
It's when I started in economic development, there were the big boys in distilleries. There was a Jim Beams and the Heaven Hills and, the Four Roses and Buffalo Traces. There were the big boys that were in distilling. And then came a little company called the Bardstown Bourbon Company in
Yeah,
Bardstown. And they came in, they had a totally different format. They were going to come in, seeing this boom of bourbon that was getting ready to happen, watching the trends. And they knew that a lot of these distilleries had been selling their bourbon to other small companies that didn't have distilleries, but they had labels.
sure.
And they knew because of the bourbon boom was coming in that these larger distilleries were going to be unable to sell their bourbon because they needed every drop that they could get. So they quit selling to these brands, which means these brands had to come in and build their own distilleries if they wanted to keep their labels going. Luxro was a perfect example of that. They bought all their bourbon before from Heaven Hill and they bottled it as Rebel Yell and some other things. And, that's how that worked. But when Heaven Hill said, no, I'm sorry, we can't sell you any more bourbon, it's either they're going to close down shop or they just build their own distillery. And that's what they did. They came to Bardstown, found a beautiful piece of property, and they built their own distillery. And, the rest is history with them. But the Bardstown Bourbon Company did something different. They did contract distilling. So a
Right,
lot of these labels that you see out there, they didn't make their own brand at the time. They just made bourbon for other
right,
brands. And it was a gazillion-dollar business because everyone wanted their own bourbon. We've got Brad Paisley out there doing his
right.
own bourbon, and a lot of other celebrities actually wanted their own bourbons as well too. But, a lot of the bourbons that you see on the shelf that are very popular are made at Bardstown Bourbon Company and
That's right.
labeled with that brand. So that started it. And when they started, they built a restaurant. They run a visitor center. So instead of just the distilleries making bourbon, producing bourbon, they all started an experience, meaning they started doing tours and tastings. They built restaurants and some of them even had hotels. So they went from producing bourbon to actually being a destination for bourbon where you can be on site, eat, drink, and be merry and
Yeah.
spend the night. And that's how the bourbon industry changed. They really had to step up their game when all these other new distilleries started coming in. We were very complacent. I remember Bill Samuels with Maker's Mark coming in with me and the mayor, and he sat us down and he shook his hand and said, "You all need to step it the heck up. Louisville is going to eat your all's lunch for bourbon
Oh,
because you're being very complacent." And he basically took us to the woodshed.
yeah.
And he loved Bardstown because he's from here. He's born and
Right.
raised here. And he saw what Louisville was doing, but we were the only town doing bourbon at the time. We were the only ones that had really distilleries. And he shook us up and we knocked it into high gear. And all these distilleries came and all the restaurants came and the hotels came. We just, kicked it into high gear because we had our rear ends kicked by, Bill Samuels and Maker's Mark. And when
Well,
Bill talks, you do
yeah.
because he's the best.
How cool is that? So, I mean, that conversation with Bill, and then now you look up and in some cases, Bardstown is considered the bourbon capital of the world, right? So you
Yeah.
talk about Bardstown Bourbon Company, which I'm having worked now in the business for several years and being involved in several different tourism related destinations with the bourbon theme. I'm just so infatuated with that model. And I don't think a lot of people realize that in some certain instances, they're manufacturing for 50 different brands, right? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
a lot of people just assume that every brand that you see, they're making their own
Has a
bourbon.
distillery. Yeah.
Right, and they don't,
They
because
don't.
there's not enough capital and time to so I think Bardstown really elevated the bourbon industry and everybody else responded to it in terms of that tourism destination, and I think they've done just so much good for the industry because even like, for example, my wife may not be interested in bourbon at all, right? But going to bars places like Bardstown Bourbon Company is incredibly fun, right? The tour and
Right.
then the dinner and the experience becomes this enjoyable thing. And even if you're not drinking bourbon, the experience
Is
itself
it
sprinkled across the entire industry.
And it has, and you know what? It has been a trickle down, as you all know, because your company has worked with so many distilleries on, starting a distillery building and having experiences located with those as well too. But it has helped lots of small towns because I can't tell you all the small communities across the state that now have a distillery. And you know
Yeah.
what? Before this big boom, bourbon boom, and before all that, there were more dry counties in Kentucky than
Right.
were wet counties. And
Right.
now that's changed because these towns that didn't even have liquor laws or anything, they were getting a distillery. So they're going to change their laws. But there's a lot of little distilleries just peppered across the state. And, we have sent several next door to our neighbors in Washington County and Marion County because we've run out. But it's very regional. Kentucky Bourbon Trail is one of the most visited destinations in the country today. And we're just fortunate to be right in the heart of the epicenter of all that here in Bardstown. So that's been pretty beneficial and it's been pretty awesome, honestly.
Yeah, so we're talking a lot about tourism, which reminds me, you're currently and have been for a little bit. You're chairing the Kentucky Tourism Finance Development Authority, and you've been doing that for many years now. And I'm sure it's just giving you quite the perspective of tourism in Kentucky, what we're doing well, what we're not doing well. I think I was in a meeting this morning where I think I saw because you're always tracking numbers a
Mhm.
year prior, right? So the 2023 numbers, I think we did something crazy, right? 13, $15 billion worth of economic impact from the tourism industry. And obviously bourbon's had a lot to do with that.
Yes.
But from that authority, Kim, share some of your experience from that and maybe even some positives and what Kentucky's continuing to improve on.
That's been an eye opener for me, because not knowing everything across the state and what everyone's unique organic aspects are. And it's been fun to see these projects across the state, whether it be major new campgrounds, whether it be the Arc, up in the northern part of the state, whether it be the Speedway, whether it be additions to Churchill Downs, whether it be new distilleries in smaller communities, upgrades to hotels. I mean, I can go on and on with the cool projects that we have been able to approve through our authority. And we had a record year last year. Last year was the biggest number of investment in projects that ever approved under this board. And that
Yeah,
was pretty good because more people are finding out about it. And there are
sure.
more projects that are happening out there. And I think that's what sets us apart. I think the only thing that we have people a lot of times ask, well, can I get a distillery in my town? Or how can I get, Main Street to be a destination? And when we see some of these projects come up, there's some of them that we just kind of question because they are truly not unique to their areas. You have to be authentic to who you are. I can't tell you the number of people that come to Bardstown and say, all you have is distillery. Where's your outdoor recreation? We want to go white water rafting or we want to go canoeing down a river. And, I have to tell these communities and a lot of these economic development leaders, you can't be everything. You
Sure.
have to be authentic. If you're a wilderness area, you have forests and you have rivers, you need to be, adventure types of counties. If you're more right outside an urban area, then you have the type of uniqueness to some other type of tourism aspect. But so many people want what others have in the town, and that has caused I think that has caused us to want to be like everybody else. I want a distillery. I want this. And
Sure.
we're starting to educate people more about the money that we have to give and what it's for and how you can utilize it to grow your community and bring more tourism to your county or to your part of the state. So I think,
Right.
more education about these funds, how they can help you, how they can help a county, and how they can work with people to really dig into a county and say, this would really help you. This is what you need to do to grow your county tourism wise and your tourism economy.
Well, I mean, tourism plays such a big role for this state, right? That I think so many people don't realize, and all the direct benefits from each of these projects that then spin off into these indirect and induced benefits that end up helping so much more of the community that people don't realize. The ARC project up in Northern Kentucky is just so fascinating to me.
It is.
Again, I mean, I don't know if anybody would have thought that building that type of project just up in Northern Kentucky would have had the success that it's had. And again, just in general, what a good tourism project located just in the right spot can do for an area is just fascinating. And the state of
Yeah.
Kentucky is becoming so much more reliant on sales tax right now because the state's in this transition of changing the tax code, which is why I just think the work that you all are doing at tourism and your board in particular has such a just an awesome role in bringing in more opportunity to the state that I think hopefully we see more and more of it in the coming years.
I hope so too. And it's something that Kentucky has is our state park system. We're
Yeah.
finally being able to put money into a lot of our resort state parks. But there's nothing like our state parks in Kentucky. They are affordable vacations for families and they are close. There's a state park just, probably within an hour or two of wherever you are in any part of the state. And I think that those are growing now. I think they're starting to put more money in them. They're developing more amenities around them. We have one of them was a water park that was going to be built near one. One was a really nice high end campground that was going to be built near one. So people are taking some of our existing infrastructure and some of our existing tourism destinations and growing them and hopefully, making them more accessible and appealing to people who are coming in to visit.
Yeah, that's great. So, Kim, small town America, some would deem you the queen of small town America. You actually wrote a book
I did.
called Small Town Sexy, and that's
I did.
taken all over the country and even the world in some cases. Like, take us through that roller coaster.
Yeah. That was a roller coaster, and the way I got it, I never set out to write a book.
Yeah.
I've been a journalist, a broadcast journalist for many, many years, but I never really set out to write a book. But I served on a committee with the head economic development for the city of Louisville. And they thought, okay, we'll put the biggest city on with one of the smallest towns, Bardstown, and we'll put both of those directors as co-chairman of this regional organization to help all the communities and counties around Louisville to work better together. And so we were on this panel speaking, and somebody got up and said, urban is where it's at. I don't know why anybody would want to move to small town America. They're all dying. There's tumbleweeds flowing through the main
Yeah.
streets, and there's really nothing there. The towns are dying. Well, they should never said that with
Yeah,
me
right, the
with a
wrong person.
microphone in my
Yeah.
face.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
So it was my time to speak. So I got up and I reacted and I took at point by point everything that gentleman had said and I debated it. And, I was very respectful, and
Sure.
I actually, explained to him that small towns are, amazing places to live. People do want to live there. And I went on and on. It was quite lengthy, to be honest with you. I thought the book was going to come out at any time to pull me off the stage. But after that, I had a gentleman come up to me as a book publisher. And he said, "You're so passionate about this. What do you think about writing a book about everything that you just said?" Well, I
Wow.
just laughed at him and I just laughed. I'm like, "What? I'm not an author." He said, "But you can be. And you've got the passion, you've got the knowledge, and let's do a book together." So it was, Bobby Clark from Lexington. He was located not too far from where your offices were with Clark
Yeah.
Publishing. And we spent about 6 months. I sequestered myself at a cabin on a lake and spent a lot of time writing and writing and writing and writing, and finally came out with Small Town Sexy. And the sexy meaning the seductive charm that small towns have. But I knew
Right.
sexy would get attention too. It would stick out then rather than, small town great or small town, something. But sexy was always something that I thought would get attention to. And
Yeah.
when I say small town sexy, it's that seductive allure that small towns have for so many people that just brings you in and grabs your heartstrings and makes you never want to leave. And that's what I wrote the book about.
I mean, how crazy is that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
yep,
really is
I
crazy.
I've yet to have one of those moments in life that you've already described, like 3 of them. I mean, so not to keep going back to it, but what's it writing a book? I mean, like, how did you go from A to Z? And again, I would encourage anybody that hasn't read it, go online and buy it. It's an awesome read, but I mean, again, I can't fathom sitting down to write a book.
It was easy. I'm a storyteller and I
Sure.
love telling stories. I have so many stories about companies I've recruited here from one thing to another, some great fun stories, as the Takagawa story with the binoculars.
Yeah.
But there's so many fun stories to be told about things that happen in small towns. And so it's a fun book. It's not an academic book by any means, but I actually looked through it again last night for the first time in probably many, many years. And I
Yeah.
remembered I had done an interview with a guy from CBRE, which is a
Yep.
commercial real estate agency. And he was talking about how he enjoys and what the allure of bringing clients to small town America was. And it was just stories like that, or people I had worked with that brought me companies, people that had done festivals here, my Japanese clients are in the book talking about how they got here. And it's just a story that honestly tells a love story, my passion, but my love story for small town America and why. And,
Yeah.
why people are coming back to small towns. The number of retirees that we are seeing right now in Bardstown and so many small towns is just incredible. You put yourself near a national airport and you're going to get people that want to retire in your community. They want to be near their kids. COVID brought so many families home. So
Sure.
families could help them raise their children because they could telecommute. They never left. You
Right.
know, you can do big business that you normally would do on Wall Street that you can now do on Main Street, USA,
Yeah.
because you have the telecommuting opportunity and good broadband in small towns. So it doesn't matter where you're doing business right now. And so many times you can do that in small town America now. And that's what's bringing people home or people here for the first time and they're falling in love with small towns.
Yeah. So, Kim, how many people live in Bardstown slash Nelson County?
14,000.
14,000. All right.
14,000.
So, that's a small community, right? But again, my encouragement to communities across the region, the country, 14,000 people, and you were able to generate such significant business from manufacturing, all of the tourism. I mean, I think the message is that with the right people, with the right passion, with the collaborative nature. There in some cases, like if your community is located in the middle of nowhere, then and that makes it more challenging. But
It does. It does.
it's not like Bardstown and Nelson counties, just sitting right off of I-75, right? Like you all, are a smaller community that's had so much success. So I think this conversation is a great reminder to people. There's so much opportunity for small communities in small town America, which I'm really long on, and I'm sure you are too for the foreseeable future.
You know what? All small towns are not created equal. And it breaks my heart when I travel with my husband. Poor thing, I make him get off the interstates. We have to drive through Americana. We have to take the
Yeah.
2-lane highways that have been there for decades and decades and decades because I want to see America. I want to see these small towns. I want to see what's happening. And it's not all good, of course, across the country. There is so much brain drain. As soon as
Sure.
these kids graduate high school, they're leaving and they're not coming back. You have lack of housing. You have the farms are being sold off because the kids aren't there to take over the family farm anymore. So these farms are being sold off to maybe, other people for development or for land or for subdivisions or anything like that. And then There's so many small towns that just don't have the infrastructure and can't afford to have the
Yeah.
infrastructure or land to have industrial parks. So, as much as I'd love to say every town can be a Bardstown, there are towns out there that just are not set up to be it. So, when I go to talk to a lot to them, and I have been to many that are not so small town sexy, I have told them again to be authentic to who you are. You've got
Sure.
800 people living in this town. Make sure you have the amenities for them. Make
Right.
sure you have, the grocery stores you need, the medical services that you need, the good schools and these things. If you're not going to be a town that's going to have tourism here, make sure that you're a vital town for those 800 residents who have moved there.
Yeah.
And you just want to make sure you don't lose people and you keep the people that you have as well too. It's tough. My heart's been broken in many towns I've spoken in because I have left there knowing that, I'm leaving a group of city officials with a lot of challenges. There's always your local residents you have to take care of and make sure you have a town ready and set for them.
Yeah, it's tough, Kim. Economic development really is the long game, right? And
Mhm.
you know, I've always said it's similar to baseball. I was a baseball guy growing up. When you're working projects, if you win, 3 out of 10, man, you are crushing it, right?
Yeah.
Like you really are, and similar, just like baseball. I mean, so I try to give that encouragement to so many of the smaller communities that we work with because you can get what we call like RFI fatigue, right? You're responding to requests for information, whether it's from the cabinet or if it's from a site selection consultant or a company itself, and you
Oh, yeah.
respond to, 10, 20 of them, and you haven't won a project yet, right? I mean, it's the long game. So for these smaller communities, I do believe, again, they're not all created equal. And I think those that come to that realization on the front end, but make investments, again, according to scale, right? And realize that you're making an investment for 10 years into the future. There is success to be had. So you've told such a great story in the work that you've done, Kim. I mean, I'm just so thrilled to have the opportunity to have worked with you for so many years. So let me wrap up the conversation with two questions. All right.
Okay.
Where I am in my career now, I'm trying to think, man, what what would I have liked for somebody to have told me about economic development when I was in college, right? Trying to figure out what I'm going. I didn't even know what it was when I was in college. So, what first question is, what's the one piece of advice that you would give a young professional that's either considering economic development or entering the field? What's the best piece of advice you can give
I think I told you when we talked once before, you don't grow up saying, when I grow up, I'm going to be an economic development
them?
person.
Right.
Number one, you don't know what that means. I didn't know
Yeah.
what that mean. I don't think until I was in my 20s. And so it's
Sure.
hard to have a career path toward that. There's nothing in your high schools. There's very little in college. University of Kentucky has a good program. But if this is something that you're interested in, and sometimes I drop the economic development and I put community on there because
Sure.
community development is pretty much the same thing. But if this is something, if you have a passion about your community, or if you have a passion about building communities, or if you have a passion about working with clients, trying to find that next home for that manufacturing facility or something, you know, start start working with those people who are doing it. I worked under the mayor and the county judge even before I was an economic development professional because I was in media broadcasting and I had to cover all the city council meetings and all the
Yeah.
fiscal court meetings. So during those meetings, I get to learn about the companies that were coming or the sewer pipes that had to be put in or the new roads that we were
Right.
doing. And that just made me fall in love with community development.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. Every organization is always looking for somebody to intern under them, to learn from them, to be a mentor for somebody. But there's not a lot because, like every community or county has one. So it's not like
Right.
there's a whole lot of jobs out there, but there's a lot of different aspects of economic development that you can go into. There's planning and zoning. There is,
Exactly.
downtown development. There is historic preservation. There's all sorts of things like that, and if you love community, then those are the types of places that you need to really start looking.
I think what you just said is perfect. Anytime I'm talking to a young person, it's like, what is economic development? If I want to get into it, or how do I know? My answer is, if you love where you live and you get excited about that new restaurant that just located here or that new building going downtown, then economic development is probably gonna be interesting to you, right? I mean,
Right.
those types of signs that if you just love where you live and you love all the small and large successes, economic development has something to do with it, right? So, all right, last question, very specific to you. What excites you the most about the future of small town America?
Oh, I see a bright future for small town America. And you know when and I always said this to my big city friends, and I always called them my big, on my economic development friends, I call them big city. That's
Yeah,
my nickname for the big city. But there has been a discontent in lots of big cities post COVID.
sure,
And, we have found that a lot of people, like I said earlier, came home. But what we're finding also in some small towns are that people want to come home because they want their kids to have that same experience they had did. They wanted to have this go to the same schools they went to, play on the same football fields as they have. They want the grandparents to be able to pick them up at school. They want all these experiences. They want to be safe. They want to be where hospitals and good health care is. And it doesn't take you 30 minutes to go pick your kids up in the afternoon. You're there in 5 minutes. There is such an allure of small town now post COVID just because people have slowed down. There's a little more simplicity in people's lives. And we have seen a surge in our population here of people who are coming in from out of town. We've got a lot of people from California
yeah,
that are moving here. And so many of them are older couples who are retiring. And they
sure,
say, I like the weather. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. You're
right,
right. It's, like the Three Bears. It's just right.
right,
The cost of living is good here. You've got good places to get on an airplane and go places. So I think that big city folk out there are finding that small towns do have an allure. And
yeah,
it's something that they want to slow down after a fast paced career. They want to settle in a place where they can live out the rest of their life and just have a wonderful, wonderful life.
yeah,
And I see that for small towns. I see it growing with economic development. I see more companies looking at us, so I think it's good for the majority of small towns out there. I'm seeing that they're working more regionally with their
yeah,
big city friends, their big city economic development friends, and working together as a team. That's happening more than ever. And I
sure,
think that combined with just the towns and their allure in general, I think small towns are going to be okay. I think
yeah.
they're gonna do very, very well in the next decade or so.
I think you're right, and I think you have a lot to do with, why small towns are still very sexy and attracting, Kim, so, hey, listen, I can't thank you enough. This has been fun, and I appreciate you being the first conversation that we've had on economic development and everything else in between. So, and congrats, Kim. I mean it on all the success you've had. I'm being serious.
Thanks.
You have set the bar for economic development, and people like me are just trying to live up to it. So,
Oh, you're too
uh,
kind. But
oh,
I've been one of those people that I couldn't wait to get to the office every day. I
yeah,
couldn't wait to share the stories. I couldn't wait to talk to people about Bardstown. I've always said Bardstown is my third child.
yeah,
And I think it takes someone that has a passion like that about your community to really want to push it forward. And there's a lot of people out there that are like that. And
that's right.
so I think we're gonna be good. So thank you for inviting me. I'm retired now, but I'm still got my foot in the pond of economic development and consulting.
Absolutely.
So that's fun. That's some of the things I like to do more than anything, to be honest with
Yeah.
you.
Well, we won't let you go that easy. That's for sure. So, well, Kim, thanks so much. This has been great. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucas. It was wonderful. And MWM Consulting for everything that you've done. I've worked with you on projects already, and you all do a great job. And I look forward to
Thank
working with you all some more.
All right, Kim. Thanks so much.